Do you enjoy chilling stories, mysterious legends, and tales that make you think twice before turning off the lights? Then you're in the right place. On this channel, every video is a journey into the unknown, bringing you spooky tales, curiosities, and mysteries you won't find just anywhere. So hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this video with someone who also loves a good dark story. That way you'll help our community grow and make sure you don't miss the next tale. 5 horror stories what American truckers saw on the Interstate. America's interstate highway system stretches across millions of miles, cutting through our continental nation from coast to coast, north to south. During the day, these are bustling arteries that connect cities and lives. But when night falls, when the last lights of civilization disappear in the rearview mirror, these same highways transform into something completely different. I'm someone who has spent years collecting stories, talking to people who experience the unexplainable. And if there's one group of people who have direct contact with the mysteries of American highways, it's truckers, men and women who spend entire nights driving through the darkness, witnessing things that defy any rational explanation. Today, I'm going to share with you 5 accounts that were told to me by experienced truckers. Stories that made me question everything I thought I knew about reality. Stories you might prefer to hear with all the lights on. So settle in, because our journey through America's haunted highways is just beginning. First story. The Lady in White of I-40. I met Big Jim at a truck stop in Amarillo, Texas. He had over 30 years on the road, his face weathered by sun and the winds that come through the cab window during cold pre-dawn hours. His calloused hands held his coffee with a steadiness that only someone who spent decades behind the wheel can have. But when he started telling me about that night on I-40, those same hands trembled slightly. It was a Tuesday in March 2019. Jim was heading back from Los Angeles to Memphis, hauling electronics for a store downtown. The schedule was tight, as it always is in freight transport, so he decided to drive through the night to make his delivery window. I-40 through that stretch between Flagstaff and Albuquerque is known among truckers as one of the most dangerous in the country, not just because of frequent accidents, but because of the stories that circulate among drivers, stories that most prefer not to discuss out loud. It was around 3 in the morning when Jim spotted a figure by the roadside, a woman dressed completely in white, standing near a small pull-off area. She was waving her hands, clearly hitchhiking. Jim instinctively slowed down. In his 30 years on the road, he'd stopped to help plenty of folks. Families with broken-down cars, lost people, even fellow truckers in trouble. It was an unwritten code among those who make their living on the highways. Always help when you can. But something about that woman bothered him deeply. First, it was mighty strange to find a person alone on that stretch, especially a woman, in the middle of the night. Second, she was immaculately dressed in white, not a road dirty white, but a pure white that seemed to glow under his headlights. Jim stopped his rig about 50 yards past the woman. In his mirrors, he could see her walking toward the truck, but there was something wrong with the way she moved. Her steps were too slow, almost gliding across the asphalt. He rolled down the passenger window and called out, "You need help, ma'am?" The response came in a voice Jim described as too sweet, like spoiled honey. The woman said she needed to get to the next town, that her car had broken down a few miles back. That's when Jim decided to look in his side mirror to get a better view of her as she approached. And that's when his heart nearly stopped. The woman cast no shadow. His headlights were on. The moon was full that night, but even so, where there should have been a shadow, there was absolutely nothing. It was as if she were made of light rather than flesh and bone. Jim felt a chill run from the base of his spine to his neck. His survival instinct, honed by decades on the road, screamed for him to hit the gas and get out of there immediately. "Sorry, ma'am, but I'm hauling hazmat. Can't take passengers," he lied, already putting his hand on the gear shift. The woman's response froze him completely. She laughed, a low, prolonged laugh that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Big Jim," she said, pronouncing his name with frightening precision. "James Robert Patterson, born July 15th, 1965, in Little Rock, Arkansas, son of Mary Sue and Robert Earl Patterson." Jim had never told this woman his name, never mentioned his birth date or his parents' names. How the hell did she know this information? "I know many things about you, Jim. I know about that accident in 2003 when you hit that little girl in Tulsa. I know you never told anyone about it. I know you still dream about her every night." The accident. How could she know about the accident? In 2003, Jim had indeed been involved in a hit-and-run. An 8-year-old girl had chased a ball into the street around a blind curve. He tried to brake, but it was too late. The girl died at the scene. The case was filed as an accident, no fault to the driver, but Jim had carried that guilt for 16 years. He'd never told the details to anyone, not to his wife, not to his kids, not even to the pastor during confession. It was a secret he kept buried deep in his soul. "I can make your guilt disappear, Jim," said the voice, now seeming to whisper directly in his ear, though the woman was still outside the truck. "Just give me a ride. That's all. A ride to the next town." Jim looked in the mirror again. The woman was now beside the passenger door with her hand on the handle. But when he looked directly at her through the side window, he saw something that made him floor the accelerator. The woman's face had changed. Where there once were normal human features, now there was something indefinable. Her eyes were completely black, with no visible iris or pupil. Her mouth was open in an impossible smile, too wide to fit on a human face, and from the corners of that mouth dripped a dark liquid that could have been blood. Jim accelerated with all the power his diesel engine could provide. The rear wheels spun briefly on the asphalt before finding traction. He looked in his mirrors and saw the figure still standing in the same spot, watching the truck drive away. But the most terrifying thing was that even with the truck already more than 100 yards away, he could still hear that laughter, a laughter that seemed to come from the passenger seat, as if someone were sitting right there. Jim drove without stopping until dawn, when he finally reached a truck stop with other drivers. Only when he saw other people, when he felt he was back among the living, could he stop shaking. He told me he went back on that highway many times in the years that followed, always during the day, never at night again. And whenever he passed the spot where he'd encountered the lady in white, he'd say a prayer and gun the engine. "Doc," Jim told me before saying goodbye that afternoon in Amarillo, "I've seen plenty of strange things on these roads, but that woman, she wasn't of this world. And if you're ever driving alone at night and see a lady in white asking for a ride, do yourself a favor. Don't stop. Never stop." Second story. The Lost Children of I-80. Carlos has been hauling cattle between Wyoming and Chicago for 25 years. He's a man of few words, who speaks only when necessary and always with the wisdom of someone who knows intimately the dangers and mysteries of America's highways. I met Carlos at a mandatory rest stop for truckers in North Platte, Nebraska. He was checking his load documentation when I approached to chat. Initially reluctant, he only started talking after I mentioned I was collecting stories about supernatural experiences on the road. "If you want a real story," he said, lighting a cigarette with hands that showed decades of calluses from gripping the wheel, "I've got one that'll make you rethink everything you know about this country." Carlos's story happened on an August night in 2017 on I-80 in the stretch between Cheyenne and Des Moines. He was transporting 50 head of cattle to a packing plant in Chicago, a trip he'd made at least 3 times a month for over a decade. I-80 through that stretch is known among truckers as the Lonesome Highway. It's hundreds of miles with very few towns, few truck stops, and dense vegetation that seems to swallow the road from both sides. During the day, it's just a long, monotonous highway, but at night, it transforms into something completely different. Carlos had been driving for about 6 hours when he decided to take a break. It was almost 4 in the morning, and he was starting to feel the first signs of fatigue. He spotted a small rest area by the roadside, one of those improvised spots that truckers themselves create over the years. He parked the truck, checked the load to make sure the animals were okay, and decided to catch an hour's nap before continuing the trip. Carlos always slept in the cab during these stops. It was safer and cheaper than looking for a motel. He just settled into his seat when he heard children's voices coming from outside. Initially, Carlos thought he was dreaming, or that fatigue was playing tricks on his mind. After all, it was 4 in the morning, in the middle of a deserted highway, miles from the nearest town. What children would be playing at that hour and place? But the voices continued. There were several children, seeming to be playing some game, laughing and chattering in typical childish excitement. Curious and concerned, Carlos climbed down from the cab to investigate. What he saw left him completely confused. There were at least 10 children playing in a small clearing beside the rest area. Boys and girls, apparently 6 to 10 years old, all wearing clothes that seemed to be from decades past. Short pants for the boys, simple dresses for the girls, all barefoot. They were playing Ring Around the Rosie, singing a song Carlos didn't recognize. The melody was childish, but there was something disturbing about it, something that made his hair on the neck stand up. "Hey, kids!" Carlos called out. "What are you doing out here? Where are your parents?" The children stopped playing and looked at him. That's when Carlos felt the first sign that something was terribly wrong. All the children were smiling, but their smiles were identical. Not natural children's smiles, but forced expressions, as if someone had drawn the same curved lips on each little face. And their eyes seemed empty, like black holes in their pale faces. "Mister," said a girl who appeared to be the oldest of the group, "do you want to play with us?" The girl's voice echoed strangely, as if it came from far away, though she was only a few yards away. Carlos felt a shiver run down his spine. "Children, you need to go home," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's very late. Your parents must be worried." "Our parents are here," said a small boy, pointing toward the dense woods. "They're all here, in the forest. Do you want to meet them?" Carlos looked in the direction the boy pointed. The woods were completely dark, but he had the impression of seeing shapes moving among the trees, shadows that seemed to be watching him, waiting for something. "Come play with us, mister," the girl insisted. "We just want to play. It's been so long since we've had a new friend." The children began approaching Carlos, still maintaining those identical, disturbing smiles. They moved strangely, as if floating rather than walking, their bare feet making absolutely no sound on the ground covered with dry leaves. That's when Carlos noticed something that made his blood freeze. None of the children cast shadows on the ground. The moon was high and clear that night. His headlights were still on, but even so, where there should have been children's shadows, there was nothing, as if the children were made of light, or something that didn't interact with the physical world the same way normal human bodies do. I need to go," Carlos said, backing toward the truck. "I have a delivery to make, need to keep moving." "You can't go," the girl said, and her voice lost all childish tone. Now it sounded deep, adult, threatening. "You can't leave. We've been alone so long." The other children began repeating the same phrase, like a disturbing chorus. "You can't leave. We've been alone so long." Carlos ran to his truck and climbed into the cab with agility he hadn't had in years. He started the engine immediately and began to accelerate, but something was preventing the truck from moving. He looked in his mirrors and saw that the children were clinging to the back of the truck, preventing it from leaving the spot. But the most terrifying thing was that they were still smiling, those impossible, identical smiles, even while exerting superhuman force to hold back a loaded truck. Carlos floored the accelerator. The engine roared, the rear wheels burned rubber on the asphalt, but the truck remained stationary. Through his side mirrors, he could see more children emerging from the woods, dozens of them, all with the same empty expressions and disturbing smiles.
"Please," Carlos murmured, saying a prayer he hadn't said in years. "Saint Christopher, protector of travelers, help me get out of here." Then he remembered something his grandfather had taught him when he was a child. His grandfather was an old-school trucker, one of those who knew all the mysteries and legends of America's highways. He always said that when things got too strange on the road, there was a trick that worked. Carlos grabbed a small St. Christopher medal he always kept on his dashboard. He kissed the medal and began praying aloud, as loud as he could, reciting every prayer he remembered from childhood. "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." As he prayed, he could feel the resistance at the back of the truck gradually diminishing. The children's voices grew more distant, as if they were being pulled away by some invisible force. "And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen." The truck finally broke free, and Carlos accelerated like he'd never accelerated in his life. He drove without stopping for more than 200 miles until he found the first open gas station. Only when he saw other people, when he felt he was back in the normal world, could he stop and breathe properly. Carlos told me he researched that location in the following days. He discovered that in 1987, a school bus had been involved in a serious accident on that same stretch of I-80. 15 children had died at the scene, all between 6 and 10 years old. "Doc," Carlos told me before continuing his journey that afternoon in North Platte, "I don't know if those children were trapped in that place since the accident or if it was something else entirely. But I know they weren't normal children. And if you're ever traveling at night and hear children's voices on the highway, don't stop to investigate. Pray, accelerate, and get away as fast as you can." Third story: The Ghost of the Blue Rig. Tommy is 52 years old and has spent almost 30 of those years traveling the highways of the American South. He specialized in hauling agricultural products between Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, a route he knows like the back of his hand.
He's a serious religious man who always keeps a crucifix hanging from his rearview mirror. I met Tommy at a stop in Jackson, Mississippi. He was unloading sacks of soybeans when I approached to chat. Initially suspicious, he only started talking about supernatural experiences after he noticed I was genuinely interested in hearing his stories, not mocking them. "There's a story I've never told anyone," he said, checking if other truckers were close enough to hear. "Not my wife, not my kids, but if you really want to know how things are out here, I'll tell you." Tommy's story happened on a September night in 2018 on I-20 on the stretch between Shreveport and Jackson. He was transporting a load of corn to the port, a routine trip he'd made at least twice a month for over 15 years. I-20 through that stretch is a winding road, full of sharp curves and dangerous grades. During the day, it offers stunning views of the southern countryside, but at night, especially on foggy nights like that one, it becomes one of the most treacherous highways in the South. Tommy was coming down a grade around 1 in the morning when he noticed a blue rig in his mirrors. The vehicle maintained a constant distance, neither approaching nor falling back, just matching Tommy's pace. Initially, Tommy didn't think much of it. It was normal to encounter other truckers making the same run, especially during the early morning hours when traffic was lighter. But as the miles passed, he began to find the way the other driver was driving strange. The blue rig always maintained the same distance, regardless of speed. When Tommy accelerated on straightaways, the other vehicle accelerated proportionally. When he slowed down on curves, the other truck also slowed down, always maintaining exactly 50 yards. "Must be a rookie," Tommy thought. "Must be scared of the fog and following me because I know the road." But then something happened that made Tommy completely reconsider the situation. On one of the sharpest curves of the descent, known by local truckers as Dead Man's Curve due to frequent accidents, Tommy had to rapidly reduce speed. The fog was very dense at that point, and visibility was no more than 10 yards. He looked in his mirrors to check if the blue rig had also reduced speed, worried about the possibility of a collision. What he saw left him completely perplexed. The blue rig had vanished. Tommy stopped his truck on the shoulder and got out to check. There was absolutely no sound of an engine, no taillights, nothing to indicate the presence of another vehicle on the road. It was as if the blue rig had simply evaporated. "Strange," Tommy muttered, getting back in the cab. "Must have taken some exit I didn't see because of the fog." But 15 minutes later, when Tommy was reaching the bottom of the grade, he saw the blue rig again. It was parked at an abandoned truck stop by the roadside, a place Tommy knew well because it had operated until a few years before. Curious and concerned about the other driver, Tommy decided to stop to check if everything was okay. Maybe the guy was feeling sick or had some mechanical problem. He parked his truck near the blue rig and climbed down from the cab. That's when he realized something was very wrong with the vehicle. The blue rig was in perfect condition, as if it had just rolled off the dealer's lot that same day. The paint gleamed even in the weak light of the headlights. The tires looked new. There was no sign of wear or accumulated mileage. But the strangest thing was that there was absolutely no sound coming from the vehicle. The engine wasn't running, but all the lights were on. Headlights, cab lights, tail lights, everything working perfectly, without any noise at all. "Hey there, driver!" Tommy called out, approaching the cab of the blue rig. "Everything okay?" There was no response. Tommy knocked on the driver's door several times, but no one answered. The windows had dark tint that prevented seeing inside the cab. That's when Tommy decided to walk around the rig to check for any obvious problems. When he reached the rear of the vehicle, he saw something that made his heart stop for a few seconds. The rig had no license plate. Where there should have been a plate with numbers and letters, there was just a smooth metal panel with no identification whatsoever. Tommy checked the front of the vehicle and confirmed there was no front plate either.
"That's impossible," he muttered. "No truck runs without plates. How did this guy get past all the weigh stations and inspections?" Tommy was starting to get really uncomfortable with the situation. He decided to go back to his truck and continue his trip, but when he turned to leave, he heard a sound that froze him completely. The door of the Blue Rig's cab was slowly opening, making a metallic creak that echoed supernaturally in the silence of the early morning. Tommy stood still, waiting to see the driver get out of the cab. But what emerged from that door wasn't exactly a person. It was a human figure wearing blue coveralls identical to the color of the rig. But there was something profoundly wrong with that figure. It moved rigidly, like an articulated doll, and made no sound when walking. When the figure turned toward Tommy, he saw that where there should have been a face, there was only a smooth surface, without eyes, nose, or mouth. It was as if someone had erased the facial features with an eraser.
"Tommy," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once, except from the faceless figure. "Tommy Lee Williams, plate number FKG 2847, corn load, destination Port of New Orleans."
How did that thing know his name? How did it know the details of his load and destination?
"You're late, Tommy. Very late. I'm here to take you."
The faceless figure began walking toward Tommy. Its steps made no sound on the ground, but seemed to resonate inside Tommy's head like drum beats. Tommy ran to his truck with speed he hadn't had in decades. He climbed into the cab, started the engine, and accelerated without looking back. But even with the truck going over 80 miles per hour, he could still hear that voice echoing in his head.
"You can't run, Tommy. I'll always be here, waiting. Always."
Tommy drove without stopping until he reached the port in New Orleans. Only when he saw company employees coming to receive the load, when he felt surrounded by normal people again, could he breathe with relief. But the story didn't end that night. During the following weeks, Tommy began seeing the blue rig on other stretches of highway, always in the mirrors, always maintaining the same distance, always disappearing at the most unexpected moments. He told me he researched that abandoned truck stop where he first encountered the rig. He discovered that in 1995, a trucker had died at that location. The man was alone, driving a blue rig, when he suffered a massive heart attack. His body was found 3 days later, still in the vehicle's cab. "Doc," Tommy told me that afternoon in Jackson, constantly looking over his shoulder as if expecting to see something. "I don't know if that figure was the ghost of the dead trucker or if it was something else entirely, but I know it wasn't of this world. And if you're ever driving at night and see a blue rig with no plates following you, don't try to talk to the driver. Floor it and pray it doesn't decide to catch up to you." Fourth story, the cursed truck stop on I-95. Big Bill has been working America's highways for 40 years. He started as a helper while still a teenager, learned to drive trucks at 17, and since then has covered millions of miles, hauling all kinds of freight between the Northeast and Southeast. He's a living legend among I-95 truckers. I met Bill at a stop in Richmond, Virginia. He was checking his truck's tires when I approached to chat. A man of easy conversation and impressive memory, Bill knew stories from practically every dangerous stretch of America's major highways.
"There's a truck stop on I-95, he said, lighting a cigarette and settling into the shade of his truck, "that every trucker knows about, but nobody talks about it, at least not during the day. It's one of those things you only whisper about late at night when there's nobody else around." Bill's story happened on an October night in 2016 on I-95, on the stretch between Washington, D.C. and Savannah. He was hauling specialty coffee to a roastery in Atlanta, one of the most profitable runs he made regularly. I-95 through that stretch is a highway that all experienced truckers know and respect. During the day, it offers stunning views of the Atlantic coastal plain, but at night, especially on the more isolated stretches between cities, it holds secrets few dare to discuss. Bill had been driving for about 8 hours when he decided to make a mandatory stop. It was almost 3 in the morning, and he was starting to feel the signs of fatigue that every experienced trucker knows to recognize. It wasn't just physical tiredness, but that state of diminished alertness that can cause serious accidents. He knew a truck stop on that stretch, a place he'd used dozens of times over the years. It was a large area by the roadside, with public restrooms, some concrete tables, and a small diner that operated 24 hours a day. But when Bill arrived at the location that early morning, he found the truck stop completely different from what he remembered. The diner was closed, with windows boarded up with wooden planks. The public restrooms had their doors locked with rusted chains. The concrete tables were still there, but covered with a layer of dirt and dry leaves, as if they hadn't been used in years. Strange, Bill thought. Last time I stopped here about 3 months ago, everything was operating normally. Even so, he decided to stop to rest. He knew other locations further ahead, but needed at least 2 hours of sleep to continue the trip safely.
Bill parked his truck near one of the concrete tables and climbed down from the cab. The place was in absolute silence, just the distant sound of a few cars passing on the main highway. Not even crickets were making noise, which he found particularly strange for that region. He decided to do a quick inspection of his truck before sleeping. He checked the tires, the load, the brakes. Everything was in perfect condition. It was when he was checking the load safety chains that he heard voices coming from the closed diner. Initially, Bill thought maybe the establishment was operating from the back, or there was some entrance he hadn't noticed. The voices were from several people, talking and laughing like normal customers at a roadside diner. Curious, he approached the building to investigate. The windows were indeed boarded up with wooden planks, but there were gaps between the boards through which a weak, yellowish light filtered. Bill put his ear to one of the gaps and could hear the conversations more clearly. There were at least 5 or 6 people, talking about trips, loads, mechanical problems, typical trucker topics at a nighttime stop. "Excuse me," Bill called out, knocking on the main door of the diner. "Are you open? I need some coffee." The voices stopped immediately. The silence that followed was so complete that Bill could hear his own breathing echoing in the night. "Hey, folks," he tried again. "Anyone there?" Then a voice answered from inside the diner. A male voice, deep, with an accent Bill couldn't identify. "Of course we have someone here, buddy. Come on in. The door's open." Bill tried to turn the doorknob, but the door was clearly locked. He tried to push, pull, but couldn't open it at all. "The door's locked," he said. "How do I get in?" "It's not locked, friend. Just push hard. It's a little stuck, but it'll open." Bill pushed the door harder, but it remained completely immobile, as if it were welded to the frame. That's when he noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. Despite the voices coming from inside the diner, there was no light visible through the gaps in the boards. The yellowish light he'd seen before had completely disappeared. "Folks," Bill said,
starting to feel uncomfortable with the situation. "I can't get the door open. Can you open it from inside?" Sure, I'll open it for you right now. Just wait there a minute." Bill waited, but nothing happened. The door remained locked, and the voices inside the diner continued talking as if nothing had occurred. But now he could hear the conversations more clearly, and what was being said deeply disturbed him. "That's Big Bill," said a female voice. "William Robert Thompson, 58 years old, married to Martha Jane, 3 kids." "I know him," said another male voice. "He always stops here when he makes the D.C. Savannah run. Always orders black coffee and a grilled cheese sandwich." "He's a good driver," added a third voice. "Never been in a serious accident. But he's getting old, you know. Reflexes aren't what they used to be." How did those people know his full name? How did they know his wife's name and number of children? How did they know his consumption habits at that diner? Bill began slowly backing away from the door, but the voices continued talking about him. "He's scared," said someone, laughing. "Can hear his heart beating from in here." "No need to be scared, Bill," said the first voice that had spoken to him. "We just want to talk. It's been so long since we've had visitors." So long without visitors. Bill looked around the abandoned truck stop and noticed something he hadn't seen before. There were several other trucks parked in scattered positions around the location. Trucks of different models and colors, all in perfect condition. But none of the trucks had a visible driver. Bill ran to the nearest truck and knocked on the cab window. "Hey, driver! Anyone there?" No response. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. He ran to the next truck, and then the next, but all were empty and locked. That's when he noticed something that sent his blood freeze. None of the trucks had license plates. Where the plates should be, there were just empty spaces in the bodywork. "Bill!" called the voice from the diner, now seeming much closer, as if the person were outside the building. "Where are you going, Bill? We just want to talk." Bill looked toward the diner and saw that the door was open, not just unlocked, but wide open, revealing a completely dark interior. "Come here, Bill," said the voice, now clearly coming from within the darkness of the open door. "Your friends are all in here. They're waiting for you." From the darkness of the diner, silhouettes began to emerge. Human figures walking slowly toward the door, but not completely stepping into the external area. "Come, Bill," said several voices simultaneously. "Stay with us. Here you don't have to drive anymore. Don't have to worry about deliveries, deadlines, money. Here you can rest forever." Bill ran to his truck and climbed into the cab with agility he hadn't had in years. He started the engine immediately, but when he tried to leave the location, he realized other trucks had moved to block the only exit from the truck stop. The trucks without plates now formed a perfect barrier, preventing any vehicle from leaving the location. But the most frightening thing was that Bill hadn't seen or heard any of the vehicles move. "You can't leave, Bill," said the voice, now seeming to come from inside his own truck's cab. "Nobody leaves here. This is the place where truckers come to rest eternally." Bill grabbed the rosary he always carried in his pocket and began praying aloud with all the faith he'd accumulated in almost 60 years of life. "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen." As he prayed, he could see the silhouettes at the diner door slowly retreating into the interior darkness. The other trucks began gradually moving away, opening small passages between them. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. A passage opened between the ghost trucks, just wide enough for Bill's truck to pass through. He accelerated and shot through the opening like lightning, without looking back. Only when he was back on I-95, with other cars passing in both directions, did he allow himself to breathe with relief. Bill told me he returned to that truck stop a few times in the following years, always during the day, always accompanied by other truckers. During the day, the place operated normally, with the diner open, clean restrooms, and normal traffic of drivers. But he never stopped there again during the early morning hours. "Doc," Bill told me that afternoon in Richmond, "I researched that truck stop after that night. Found out that during the 80s and 90s, several truckers disappeared on that stretch of I-95. They were last seen entering that truck stop and never came out again. Families searched, police investigated, but they never found the drivers or the trucks." He paused, looking at the road as if reliving that haunted night. "I think those trucks without plates I saw there were the vehicles of the missing drivers. And the voices in the diner, they were the drivers themselves, trapped in that place forever. And they wanted me to stay with them." Fifth story, The Devil's Ride. Jake is the youngest trucker I talked to, but he's already accumulated 15 years on the road, hauling various products between California and the Northeast and Southeast states. He's a religious man, always keeps a small Bible on the passenger seat, and never travels without saying a prayer before starting the engine. I met Jake at a stop in Barstow, California. He was fueling up when he noticed I was talking to other drivers about supernatural experiences on the road. He approached hesitantly, clearly wanting to tell something, but wary of other people's reactions. "I got a story," he said after the other truckers moved away. "But it's a story that still haunts me. Happened 3 years ago, but I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it." Jake's story happened on a December night in 2020 on I-10, on the stretch between Phoenix and Los Angeles. He was returning from a delivery in Las Vegas and heading to California with an empty trailer, one of the trips he liked least because the highway seemed more dangerous when he wasn't hauling freight. I-10 through that stretch is known among truckers as the Highway of Apparitions. There are dozens of reports of drivers who saw inexplicable things on that piece of asphalt, especially during winter nights. Jake had been driving for about 5 hours when he saw a man signaling to stop by the roadside. It was almost 4 in the morning, and finding a person alone at that hour and place wasn't completely unusual. The man was dressed simply, jeans and a white shirt, and made polite gestures asking for a ride. He didn't seem dangerous or suspicious, just someone who needed help getting to his destination. Jake slowed down and stopped his truck about 50 yards past the man. In 15 years on the road, he'd given rides to plenty of folks, from families with broken-down cars to fellow truckers in trouble. It was a matter of solidarity among people of the highway. The man approached the passenger window with a friendly smile. "Good evening, friend," he said, in a pleasant, polite voice. "Could you get me a ride to Los Angeles? My car broke down a few miles back, and I need to get there before dawn." Jake looked the man over more carefully. He appeared to be about 40 years old, dark hair, neatly combed, clean-shaven, clean clothes. There was nothing obviously suspicious about him. "Sure, hop in," Jake said, unlocking the passenger door. "I'm heading to LA too." The man climbed into the cab and settled into the passenger seat. He noticed he wasn't carrying any luggage, not even a wallet or visible documents. "Thanks for the kindness," the man said. "Not everyone stops to help a stranger at this hour." "No problem," Jake replied, getting back on the highway. "We gotta help each other on the road. Never know when you might need help yourself. The first few minutes of the trip went normally. The man talked about trivial subjects, the weather, road conditions, the country's economy. It was typical conversation between people who meet during a trip. But gradually, Jake began noticing small, strange details about his passenger. First, the man didn't blink. Jake noticed this when he observed him from the corner of his eye during conversation. The man kept his eyes completely open, fixed on the road ahead, without blinking one time. Second, he made no involuntary movements. No sighs, no position adjustments in the seat, no touching his face or hair. He remained completely still, like a statue. Third, Jake realized he couldn't hear the man breathing. Even during moments of total silence in the cab, there was no sound of breathing coming from the passenger seat. "Are you all right?" Jake asked, starting to feel uncomfortable. "I'm great," the man replied, and Jake noticed that the man's lips moved in perfect sync with the words, but the voice seemed to come from a slightly different location, as if there was a small delay between lip movement and sound. Jake tried to keep calm and continue the conversation, but the strange details kept accumulating. The man knew very specific information about Jake's life. He knew where he lived, his wife's name, how many kids he had, even details about deliveries Jake had made months before. "How do you know that?" Jake asked, when the man mentioned a specific delivery he'd made in Miami 6 months earlier. "We know many things," the man replied, and for the first time his smile seemed less friendly and more predatory. "We who?" Jake asked, feeling a chill run up his spine. "Us, those who live between worlds, those who feed on the fear and loneliness of night travelers." Jake looked directly at the man for the first time since he'd gotten in the truck. What he saw made his heart nearly stop. The man's eyes had changed completely. Where there had once been normal irises and pupils, now there were only 2 black holes, as if someone had drilled infinitely deep holes in his face. "You're scared, Jake," the man said, and his voice had lost all friendly tone. Now it sounded deep, echoing, as if coming from far away. "I can smell your fear. It's delicious." Jake tried to maintain control, but his hands began to tremble on the steering wheel. He thought about stopping the truck and asking the man to get out, but something told him that would be a very bad idea. "What do you want?" Jake asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I want your soul," the man replied with frightening simplicity. "I want you to join us. You can drive forever, Jake, forever and ever, on the highways of eternity, hauling loads that never reach their destinations." The man extended his right hand toward the steering wheel, as if he were going to take control of the truck. Jake saw that where there should have been normal fingers, there were black pointed claws. That's when Jake remembered the Bible he always carried on the seat between them.
With a quick movement, he grabbed the Bible and pressed it against his chest, beginning to recite Psalm 23, which he'd memorized in childhood. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The effect was immediate. The man let out a scream that didn't sound human, a sound that mixed pain, rage, and something Jake could only describe as pure hatred. "He makes me lie down in green pastures." The man began writhing in the passenger seat, as if Jake's voice reciting the psalm caused him physical pain. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." The man was now practically dissolving before Jake's eyes. His human form became blurred, undefined, like smoke being dispersed by wind. "Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." With a final supernatural scream, the man completely disappeared. A strong smell of sulfur filled the cab for a few seconds, then dissipated into the highway air. Jake continued driving in shock for another hour until he reached Los Angeles.
Only when he saw the first city lights, when he felt he was back in civilization, could he stop at a truck stop and process what had happened. He told me he researched disappearances of truckers on that stretch of I-10. He discovered that over the years, dozens of truckers had vanished without a trace. Some of the trucks were found abandoned by the roadside, but the drivers were never located. "Doc," Jake told me that afternoon in Barstow, firmly holding the small Bible he now always kept within reach, "I don't know what that thing was that got in my truck that night, but I know that it wasn't human. And I know that if I hadn't had this Bible with me, I'd probably be another missing trucker in the statistics." He paused, looking at the highway stretching ahead. "Since that night, I never travel without saying a complete prayer before leaving. And if someone asks me for a ride at night on a deserted highway, I pray and ask for protection before deciding to stop. Because there are things on these highways that aren't of this world, Doc. Things that disguise themselves as ordinary people to deceive lonely drivers." Final thoughts. These are just 5 of the many stories I've collected over the years, talking to experienced truckers. Each one was told to me with impressive detail by men who spent decades on the highways and who would have no reason to invent or exaggerate their experiences. What most impresses me about these stories is the consistency of details. Different truckers from different regions reporting similar experiences, figures without shadows, vehicles that appear and disappear, voices that know impossible information, children who shouldn't be where they are. Do America's highways really harbor supernatural phenomena? Or do loneliness, fatigue, and the darkness of early morning conspire to create illusions in the minds of exhausted drivers? I leave that question for you to answer. But if you're ever driving alone on a deserted highway during the early morning hours and you see something strange, something that shouldn't be there, remember the words of the truckers who shared their experiences with me. Pray, floor it, and don't look back, because some things are better left in the darkness they came from. And if you're a trucker or know someone who works the highways, always keep a prayer in your heart and spiritual protection nearby, because America's highways are long, dark, and full of mysteries we may never be able to fully explain. May Saint Christopher, protector of travelers, protect all those who must face the highways during the darkest hours of the night. And may you never have to experience anything like what these brave men experienced on their journeys through America's haunted highways. Until the next story, and remember, not everything we encounter on the highway belongs to the world of the living. This collection is dedicated to all the truck drivers who keep America's economy moving, mile after mile, through sun and rain, day and night. Your courage on the road and your willingness to share these experiences reminds us that there are still mysteries in this world that science cannot explain. Drive safe, and may your guardian angels ride with you always. The end. Do you enjoy chilling stories, mysterious legends, and tales that make you think twice before turning off the lights? Then you're in the right place. On this channel, every video is a journey into the unknown, bringing you spooky tales, curiosities, and mysteries you won't find just anywhere. So hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this video with someone who also loves a good dark story. That way you'll help our community grow and make sure you don't miss the next tale.